Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another segment of Experts Corner. Today, we have Darrin Johnson, Territory Manager from Stoller Enterprises, joining us. Darrin, how are you?
Excellent today, Tracy. How about yourself?
Good. I am excited for our conversation about using plant hormones to mitigate crop stresses. Before we dive in, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Certainly. Give you a little bit of background on myself. As you mentioned, Darrin Johnson, working with Stoller Enterprises in north central Saskatchewan. Been with the company approximately 7 years now. Grew up in west central Saskatchewan, out by the Alberta border in a very tiny town called Elsask. So grew up farming in my early days and even purchased land myself at 18 years old. So I've always hobby farmed on the side of actually working full-time in the industry. So feel that I've got a pretty good handle on what growers go through, not to the same extent that full-time farmers do by any means, but have a pretty good handle of what it takes to farm. After graduating from the University of Saskatchewan, I started in the industry full-time in a wholesale distribution company, handling all the major product lines in the crop input business for retail sector, the independent retail sector. So I have that background to myself, and then started, like I said, with Stoller 7 years ago, and here we sit today.
Nice. Okay, on that note, can you share a little bit more what Stoller has to offer Canadian farmers?
Stoller in general, a good way to start this conversation on that question is when I was looking at actually working with Stoller, I was extremely impressed by the amount of effort and dollars they spend on research and development into the newer segments of agriculture. More in particular, the biostimulants, the biological side of it. Stoller was always known to be a very strong fertility company, foliar fertility company. But the last 2 decades, they've spent an awful lot of R&D effort and research and product discovery into the new segments.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So if you want to expand a little bit more on Stoller, go ahead. The next
Certainly.
question I have for you would be about the plant hormones. Did you want to add a little bit on Stoller?
Certainly. I'd say that when you're speaking about Stoller in general, what they're bringing to the marketplace is sustainable products that are out helping you to grow, more profitable crops on your current acres. Stoller brings plant hormones, like I said. They bring physiological products, plant health products to the marketplace. The research that's been done over 20, 30 years now is starting to come to fruition. Canada's a little late to the game. Some of these products have been in the marketplace globally for up to 10 plus years, even 15 years. I guess the good news to that is we're providing the latest technologies in Canada, to help actually put those bottom dollars into your jeans.
So Darrin, can you explain to me a little bit more about what plant hormones are and what they do? In our last segment that I recorded with Dr. Belmont, he explained this, but can you do a quick recap for our audience that missed that segment?
Certainly I can. Dr. Belmont would be the best educator in this side of it. I'm not going to promote that I would actually give as good an explanation as Dr. Mark would. However, I can give you a good Coles Notes version of what plant hormones are, how they work within the plant, what they do. So very simply, they're very, very small signaling molecules. So plant hormones are just like light switches within your house. You switch them on and off, and certain hormones will determine and direct growth within the plant. So these hormones, there are several of them that the plant creates. So they will determine whether that plant is in vegetative stage of growth or whether it's going to be driving the root system, whether it's moving into reproduction. All of those things are dictated by hormones. Phytohormones is another term that is often used for them. Without plant hormones or phytohormones, a plant will die. Simple as that. Just as a human has hormones that drive growth within the human body, our moods, everything as such, plant hormones create these hormones, and they are the directive to the plant on how it's going to go into growth mode. I can try and keep it simple today. There are many, many hormones, like I mentioned, but there are 3 major growth hormones, especially, that the plant creates and most utilizes. I'll touch on them basically. They have scientific terms, so sometimes it's like learning a new language when you're hearing a person speak about them. But if you think about it being just 3 basic simple growth hormones, I'll go through them one at a time. Auxin is number 1. And the takeaway with auxin is that it is the main hormone that creates a robust root system. So we want to create that robust root system to source nutrition and moisture, all the good rhizobium and soil fauna. So again, we want to make sure we have that root system. You have to have good levels of auxin. Inversely to auxin, the second one, hormone number 2, is called cytokinin. So cytokinin, or people call it kinetin sometimes. Cytokinin is the hormone that will drive the shoot. So think about a seedling emerging, it's driving the shoot out of the ground, and then it drives all of the vegetative growth and all of the branching in that plant. So if you want a nice stocky plant with lots of branches, you have to have a good high level of cytokinin available. So again, those two are inverse. They're like yin and yang. One creates the root system below ground, one creates that vegetative growth above ground.
Okay.
So moving into hormone number 3, so growth hormone 3, again, a scientific term, it's called gibberellic acid. What gibberellic acid does mainly, it is the hormone that elongates cells. So it enlarges cells. So if you want a nice big leaf surface to harness the solar sun, you want to have a nice level of gibberellic acid available in that plant. The most used place in agriculture for gibberellic acid is actually finishing off your seed size or your fruit size in any kind of a crop. So as I said, it elongates the cells. So gibberellic acid is the one that plumps your canola seed. Or when you're in the fruit and veggie industry, it's elongating that banana, making it a larger banana, making, a larger pineapple. In fact, Dole Corporation is, I think, Stoller's largest purchaser and customer of gibberellic acid, because in that fruit business, they're continuously applying gibberellic acid in very small quantities to just enlarge that fruit and size that seed at the end of the day.
Okay, wow.
Without probably, not touching on stress hormones here, I should probably talk about the stress hormones within the plant. Okay. There are applications that a lot of companies are working with globally, because, we do want a crop to go to senescence, for instance, so shutting a plant down. The hormone that does that is called abscisic acid. So it is the dormancy gene. It is the death gene. So when you want a plant to actually finally ripen and move into final senescence, because we do have winter here in Canada, we have a short growing season, so we do have to have that happen. So abscisic acid levels are what increase at the end of that growing season, so that it actually goes to final senescence.
Okay.
And the second stress hormone, which is one that probably people might be more familiar with, is called ethylene. So the stress hormone ethylene is the ripening hormone. So before abscisic acid levels rise, usually your ethylene will rise to start your ripening process, and then that triggers in the abscisic acid to have final senescence. So these hormones may sound negative because we call them stress hormones, and because they're ending the crop cycle in a sense, but obviously they're necessary. If we didn't have ethylene production at all within the plant, it would never ripen. In fact, there was a major company that found a way to actually have ethylene production stop within a plant, or not start to begin with, and the crop would die because it just wouldn't ripen properly. So it has to be there. What we don't want to happen is we don't want to have that stress ethylene, that hormone, happening in early summertime when we're in the middle of vegetative growth. So that's where the application of our growth hormones come in, is to actually mitigate that stress level and get that ethylene under control.
Fantastic. That's a great explanation, Darrin. I think you did a great job. Do you have anything to add there before we go into crop stresses?
No, I think that kind of touches on it decently. Again, Dr. Mark can do a much more thorough job of that, but Cole's Notes version, that gives you a rough understanding. So
perfect. Darrin, what is crop stress, and what are the different types of stresses?
I mean, crop stress can come in many forms. Obviously, environmentally, we're throwing curveballs all the time in agriculture. There's no doubt about that. Farmers have to deal with a lot of different challenges. It can range from anything from, early frost on seedlings, can be early hailstorms when you get extreme, can be stages of high heat. Something as simple as herbicide applications are always causing stress on a crop. Some more so than others, but that herbicide has to be metabolized by the plant before it can actually move back into growth mode again. So these are numerous and widespread throughout the growing season. So with these growth hormones, what we're doing is mitigating these crop stresses as they appear to us.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so how can farmers use plant hormones to mitigate crop stresses?
I think probably to cover off, 2 or 3 maybe basic ones to keep it simple today, that I can kind of go by certain products. One thing that we have for stress can be right at seeding time, right in the early stages of the crop. We have a product called Stimulate, and it has the 3 growth hormones we spoke of earlier. It has the auxin and the cytokinin and the gibberellic acid. So if we just take a specific situation, let's say we're seeding cereals, it can be wheat, barley, or oats. We're seeding maybe in the parklands where we're going to really cold and wet soils. So what can take place is that we're seeding in the soils that aren't warm enough yet for that perfect scenario of germination. So what takes place is you get ethylene spiking in the seed already. So that stress hormone ethylene will start to actually counteract the germination. So auxin and cytokinin are two of the auxin and cytokinin are 2 of the growth hormones that help to control the ethylene and reduce the levels of ethylene so you can get off to a good start and get germination happening. A second thing happening during those cold soils as they're introduced to the seed is that you actually have that dormancy gene, that stress hormone abscisic acid, is at a high level in the ground. So Stimulate has gibberellic acid within it, and gibberellic acid is that awakener gene, which will knock back the abscisic acid levels so you can get quicker, earlier emergence and germination happening.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
I can move into a second example for you.
Please.
Let's take a vegetative state of the crop. It can be something like a light hailstorm or even a herbicide application. During those stages, again, ethylene is going to be that stress hormone that if we have, let's use hail because it's more extreme. Mm-hmm. If you have a hailstorm that hits that crop, you're going to have that crop increasing its level of ethylene dramatically. So what the ethylene is telling the crop to do is not worry as much about the yield potential that it has, but more importantly, surviving and continue on its life cycle by propagating and dropping seed in the ground. As farmers, that's not what we want to see. We want to maintain those yield values as best as our ability under that stress situation.
Yeah.
So to control ethylene, once again, a product called BioForage. It has diformal urea, it has K, it has molybdenum and cobalt, along with cytokinin. So the 4 nutritional products will help to control that stress ethylene within the plant, and also cytokinin, again, along with auxin, help to control ethylene and get it settled back to get into that growth mode again.
Okay, perfect.
Ethylene, for an example, is if you're out mowing your lawn, or if you're out haying, maybe you've got a forage crop and you're out haying, the grass smell that you actually smell is the gas ethylene being released by the plant.
Okay.
So ethylene is a gas and it's mobile within the plant. So anytime that plant becomes under major stress, it increases and spikes. So again, what we're doing is controlling it to make sure that plant tries to maintain as much yield potential as possible and gets back into positive growth mode.
Excellent.
And I can move into a third example. One of our products, it's called Excite. And Excite just has the 1 growth hormone in it. It's called cytokinin. And we apply that quite often during high heat stress, during flowering periods. So when you look at a crop, let's use canola because it's one that we actually visually see a lot of flower blast in. And, we see those yellow flowers turning white, pale when it's 20, 29, 30, 31, 32 degrees for several days, and all of a sudden they drop. So what happens with that plant is the cytokinin that the plant has produced in the stalks and the leaves that's supporting the flowering is actually being degraded by all the sun and the heat. And cytokinin is produced way in the bottom of the plant in the very root tip. So that production facility down there, first of all, stops producing cytokinin because of the heat and the stress in the plant. It also has trouble mobilizing it and moving it up the stalk, up into the areas of the flowering points where it's needed to actually initiate flowers and to keep them from flower blasting. So that foliar application of cytokinin is replacing the cytokinin that the heat is degraded and going to maintain your flower counts and not have as many aborted pods and blanks.
Fantastic. Okay. Perfect. I know you had a few examples. Did that cover it before we move on to the next question?
I think that covers them, give you 3 different crop stages and different circumstances where they can apply, certainly.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you, Darrin. So let's chat about results. What are the results you've been seeing using these products on farms?
It's a very good question. I guess as far as a company, Stoller focuses on getting at least a 3-to-1 return on investment with any of our products that go through research and development and move into being launched into the product segment for customers and growers. So when you look at that, anything that goes to market, we're looking at least having a product that's going to be successful enough to give you $30 back for every 10 spent. So that's the starting point of where we as a company sit. When you look at results, they can be both quantitative and qualitative. So depending on the situation and the stresses involved, let's go back to the product Excite. When you've got a really robust canola crop and you've got really good soil moisture, you've got great conditions, healthy plants, and then all of a sudden you have 2 weeks of plus 30-degree heat. If it's extreme for 2 full weeks, you may get much more than a 3-to-1 return. Instead of getting a bushel or 2, you may be looking at getting 5 and 6 bushels out of that. So it's always dependent on how big the stress levels are and what the actual potential of that crop is. That's important to keep in mind. When you look at situations like the last 2 years in the prairies and the Palliser Triangle, there are certainly times when your expectations have to be set a little bit lower. If you don't have the soil moisture retention there to actually fill your seed at the end of the day and finish that crop off, expectations can be set a little lower.
But let me jump in there. But after the last couple of years, I'm sure this is music to many farmers' ears. It's been a stressful couple of years with the heat.
It always is, but it's been a little more extreme than usual. The environment and the way that weather seems to be hitting us, the climate, whether it's changing or not, the reality is that we're dealing with a changing climate here in the last years. And it's getting to be more extreme at this point in time. So yes, these products are definitely options.
Excellent. Anything else about results before we jump forward?
Again, visually, there's many times that visually you can check on the results yourselves as a grower. Everything from, if it's a seed treatment that we spoke of earlier, getting that even and quicker germination, better plant stands. Again, something like Excite in that heat stress period, where you're actually losing flowers, you can just go out and do petal counts. Very simple visual results that you can see.
Fantastic. Okay. So let's move into Stoller's products and how they compare with plant growth regulators. Do you want to touch on that?
Certainly. Plant growth regulators, it's a term that's it's very generic right now in the industry, I would say. There's a lot of different companies using PGRs or plant growth regulators as a term for their products. When I first started learning about plant growth regulators, it was actually a term that was more applied to the biostimulants than plant hormone type products like we deal with day to day. I would say more recently, a lot of growers would see them as being a product, some of the chemistries that are applied to shorten the crop nowadays and to give standability. So just to maybe differentiate between what a PGR is today, I think the growers today see some of those chemistries that shorten the crop, shorten the straw between the nodes as a PGR. We've kind of moved into calling ours plant growth promoters because they're actually promoting growth. Whereas those products, they do affect a plant hormone, by the way, those chemistries that shorten the crop. They're actually knocking out gibberellic acid production. Okay. And remember, that's the one of the largest seeds. It elongates. So what they're doing is they're knocking the production of gibberellic acid out for 7 to 10 days, and that shortens that straw between the nodes and gives better standability. So it is affecting a hormone, but it's actually a chemistry. So to differentiate there, I think that the products that we're dealing with more maybe should be called plant growth promoters because we're promoting and driving growth within the plants with these products and not inhibiting them.
Are there any other guidelines you'd suggest to farmers for using these products?
Yes, many guidelines. I would first of all say whenever you're dealing with these products, talk to your local retailer, or more importantly, contact your local territory manager. There can be things like compatibilities. plant hormones are very compatible products. However, with the amount of new biologicals that are hitting the market, from companies like ourselves and others, we're dealing with live organisms there, so we want to make sure that we're compatible. So do check before you're mixing products together to make sure that they're compatible and not going to hurt each other. Other things like water quality within the tank. Plant hormones like a neutral pH to even a slightly low pH. So if you have waters that you're using when you're spraying them, make sure that they're not up in that 8 and above range. Other than that, just volumes. If you have a continuous application of hormones, it just lengthens the availability to the plant. So some people will actually have reduced rates and go 2 and 3 times when they apply it, just to actually lengthen out that hormone effect.
Okay.
Yeah, always ask for as much information as you possibly can, I guess, would be the guideline.
Smart. Okay, now times. Is there certain times when these things shouldn't be used?
That's a good question. They're very, very safe products. Plant hormones, for instance, could be if you have an accidental over application, so you've got 2 and 3x application happen on a crop. They are very safe. You won't see, negative results from something like that happening. However, we just mentioned about, the drought that we went through in Western Canada, through a lot of the prairies in the last 2 years. If you start off with dry conditions, to spend a little bit of money on a seed treatment with plant hormones in it is not a bad idea. It's going to give you a decent start and give you a chance. However, if you have no subsoil moisture, your plants are not healthy at all. You're in a situation where you're trying to salvage or save a crop that can't be saved. Those are the times when there's no sense in spending further dollars in that crop. You do have to have, subsoil moisture to finish that crop off to get your yield out of your application.
Makes sense. Excellent. Okay. So if farmers are watching and they're interested, how can they find out more information about Stoller and your products?
I guess the easiest is, go to our website, www.stollerenterprises.ca. You can get our 1-800 number there. You can look up a lot of information on trial data, on specific product information. Probably more importantly, contact your local territory managers within Stoller, and they can give you probably the best information and advice.
Excellent. Well, Darrin, that has been fantastic. A lot of great information shared. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Tracy. Greatly appreciate the time.
You are very welcome. And you in the audience, if you enjoyed this, please tune in, and we will include show notes to Stoller's website, all the information we chatted about on farmmarketer.com. And thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.